The record-breaking storm in Oak Creek had turned the highway into a black void. A police cruiser lay overturned, pinned between a jagged cliff and a severed power line that whipped violently in the wind. Inside the crushed metal, Officer Lily Brooks was unconscious, while thick smoke began to consume the cabin. Ethan Cole slammed the brakes of his delivery truck. He did not waste a second looking for a signal on his phone. He grabbed his heavy toolbox and charged into the deluge. Most drivers would have reversed in panic, but Ethan ran straight toward the burning wreckage with a chilling, professional silence. Ethan stopped exactly 3 meters from the overturned cruiser. He did not rush blindly into the wreckage. His eyes scanned the environment with the speed of a tactical computer. The severed power line was not just a wire, it was a lethal predator, whipping back and forth, sending arcs of blue electricity dancing across the rain-soaked asphalt. The water pooling around the car was a death trap. One wrong step meant instant electrocution. Ethan turned back to his delivery truck. He didn't run for a first aid kit. He ran for the heavy-duty rubber floor mats in his cabin. He dragged them out and threw them onto the wet road, creating a precise, insulated bridge over the electrified puddles. He stepped onto the rubber, moving calmly toward the vehicle, his boots never touching the conductive water. When he reached the car, the driver's side door was crushed inward, jammed tight against the frame by the force of the impact. A normal bystander would have tried to rip the handle off or smash the window, risking a collapse that would crush the officer inside. Ethan did neither. He knelt on the rubber mat and inserted a steel pry bar into a small gap near the B-pillar. He wasn't using brute strength, he was using physics. He located the exact stress point of the twisted metal. With a single calculated movement of his wrist, he applied torque. The metal groaned, the latch released, and the door popped open smoothly, without shaking the vehicle a single millimeter. Inside, Officer Lily Brooks gasped, her eyes flying open in sheer panic. The shock was setting in. She tried to thrash, instinctively reaching for her seatbelt release. "Do not move," Ethan said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the sound of the storm like a blade. Lily froze, disoriented by the command. "Do not move your neck," Ethan repeated, leaning in. He didn't offer comfort. He offered instructions. "Look straight at my eyes. Lock your focus on me. Breathe in. Breathe out." He saw that her head was at a dangerous angle. If she had a spinal injury, one wrong twitch could leave her paralyzed. He didn't have a cervical collar. He didn't have a backboard. He only had the contents of his delivery truck. Ethan reached for a cardboard shipping box lying in the mud. In 3 seconds, he tore a strip of rigid cardboard, folded it into a thick brace, and secured it with heavy-duty duct tape from his belt. His hands moved in a blur of efficiency. He slid the makeshift collar around her neck, securing her spine with the stability of hospital-grade equipment. There was no wasted motion, no trembling. He checked her pulse, not at the wrist, but at the carotid artery, his fingers resting lightly against her throat. "I am going to cut the belt," Ethan stated calmly. "You will drop 3 inches. I will catch you. Trust me." He didn't wait for an answer. He sliced the webbing. Lily fell, but she never hit the roof. Ethan's arm was already there, cradling her head and spine in a rigid, unbreakable lock. He had stabilized a critical trauma patient in the middle of a lightning storm, using nothing but trash and tactical genius. 10 minutes later, the highway was a kaleidoscope of flashing red and blue lights. The storm was still raging, but the silence of the rescue had been replaced by the chaotic noise of sirens, shouting first responders, and the heavy thrum of a diesel fire engine. Sheriff Jim Miller stepped out of his cruiser, pulling his hat low against the driving rain. He was a man who had seen everything in Oak Creek for 30 years. He expected to find a tragedy. He expected to find a dead officer and a hysterical civilian. Instead, he found an anomaly. The paramedics were already huddled around Officer Brooks. Miller watched them work, expecting the frantic urgency of a trauma code. But the medics weren't rushing. They were calm. "Who stabilized her?" the lead paramedic shouted over the wind, looking around in confusion. Miller walked closer. He looked down at his deputy. Lily was lying on the dry pavement, shielded from the wet ground by a heavy wool moving blanket. She was placed in a perfect recovery position, her airway open, her head slightly elevated. But what caught the sheriff's eye wasn't the blanket. It was the neck brace. It was made of cardboard and duct tape, but it was constructed with architectural precision. And then there was the rope. To lower Lily safely from the tilted vehicle, the rescuer had rigged a pulley system using a tow strap. Miller knelt down to inspect the knot securing the strap to the guardrail. It wasn't a granny knot. It wasn't a knot you learned in the Boy Scouts. It was a triple-loop bowline with a safety hitch. It was a knot designed to hold human weight under extreme stress without slipping a millimeter. It was a knot used by alpine climbers, high-altitude rescue teams, and special operations units. Miller stood up slowly. He looked at the scene. The rubber mats placed over the electrified water. The door pried open at the hinge, not the lock. This wasn't the work of a good Samaritan. This was the work of a cleaner. A professional who knew how to enter, extract, and vanish without leaving a footprint. His hand instinctively drifted toward his holster, not drawing it, just resting there. "Where is the driver?" Miller barked at a rookie officer. The rookie pointed toward the back of a delivery truck parked 50 yards away. "He's over there, Sheriff. He's cleaning up." Miller walked toward the truck. He expected to see a man shaking with adrenaline, maybe vomiting from the shock of seeing a gruesome accident. Ethan Cole was standing by the open back doors of his truck. He was wiping mud off his pry bar with a rag. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't pacing. He was breathing in a slow, rhythmic cycle. "Sir," Miller said, his voice loud, projecting authority. "Step away from the vehicle." Ethan paused. He placed the pry bar gently into his toolbox and turned around. His face was wet with rain, but his expression was unreadable. It was a blank mask of compliance. "Is the officer safe?" Ethan asked. His voice was flat, no emotion. "She's alive," Miller said, narrowing his eyes. "Thanks to that knot you tied. Where did a delivery driver learn to tie a tactical extraction hitch?" Ethan didn't blink. "I used to work in construction, rigging loads." Miller didn't buy it. Construction workers didn't triage spinal injuries in a lightning storm. He looked at Ethan's hands. They were steady, too steady. In Miller's experience, the only people this calm at a disaster scene were psychopaths or soldiers. And with the cartel activity rising in the county, Miller couldn't take chances. "I need you to come to the station," Miller said. It wasn't a request. "We need a formal statement." "I can give a statement here," Ethan replied, glancing at his watch. "No." Miller stepped closer, invading Ethan's personal space. "You're coming in. We need to verify your identity. A lot of strange things happen on this highway, Mr. Cole, and you just performed a miracle that looks a lot like military tradecraft." The two deputies behind Miller tensed up, hands on their belts. They sensed the shift in the air. They were waiting for Ethan to run, to fight, to argue. Ethan looked at the deputies. He assessed their stance, their grip on their tasers, their fear. He could have disarmed all three of them in 6 seconds. He mapped out the movement in his head. A step to the left, a sweeping leg kick, a disarm. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came. That was the old Ethan. He slowly raised his hands, palms open, the universal sign of surrender. "I will come with you," Ethan said softly. "But I need to make one phone call. My daughter is waiting for me. I need to tell her I'll be late." He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't ask about his rights. He only cared about a child waiting in the dark. Miller stared at him, unsettled by the lack of resistance. It was easier when they fought. When they were this calm, it meant they had nothing to fear. Or they were hiding something so deep that a local sheriff would never find it. "Get in the car," Miller ordered. "You can call from the station." The interrogation room at the Oak Creek Sheriff's Station was a cold, cinder block box that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Ethan Cole sat at a metal table, his hands uncuffed but resting calmly on the surface. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't sweating. He was staring at the one-way mirror with a patience that unnerved everyone watching from the other side. In the adjacent booking room, Sheriff Miller was losing his patience. He stood over the desk sergeant, waiting for the results of the live scan fingerprinting system. "It's taking too long," Miller grumbled. "It usually takes 30 seconds to pull a rap sheet. This guy has to be in the system. The way he handled that wreck, he's got a record. I guarantee it." The sergeant tapped the monitor. "System is lagging, Sheriff. It's..." Wait. The screen blinked. It didn't pull up a mugshot. It didn't pull up a driver's license history or a list of prior arrests. Instead, the screen turned a stark, alarming red. A single dialogue box popped up in the center of the monitor. "What is that?" Miller asked, leaning in, his brow furrowed. "Is the machine broken?" "I've never seen this code before," the sergeant said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It says, identity protected. Sheriff, his file isn't empty, it's blacked out. Every single line of data is redacted." Miller stared at the screen. A cold realization washed over him. This wasn't a cartel hitman. Cartel hitmen didn't have their files locked by the Pentagon. "Who do we have in there?" Miller whispered. Before he could answer his own question, the phone on the sergeant's desk rang. It wasn't the standard ringtone for local calls. It was the shrill, persistent ring of the priority line, the line reserved for state emergencies. The sergeant picked it up, listened for 2 seconds, and went pale. He handed the receiver to Miller without a word. "Sheriff," the sergeant mouthed. "It's Washington." Miller took the phone. "Sheriff Miller speaking." "Sheriff," a voice on the other end spoke. It was deep, gravelly, and carried an authority that made Miller instinctively straighten his posture. "This is General Harland, United States Army Special Operations Command. You have a man in your custody named Ethan Cole." It wasn't a question. "We picked him up at an accident scene," Miller stammered, his confidence evaporating. "He was acting suspicious. We were running a background check." "Stop running the check," the general interrupted. "You are triggering a silent alarm on a classified server. Ethan Cole is not a criminal, Sheriff, and if you have him in handcuffs, I suggest you take them off immediately." Miller looked through the glass at Ethan, who was still sitting like a stone statue. "Who is he?" Miller asked. "Is he a spook? CIA?" "No," the general replied, his tone softening with a rare note of respect. "He was a sergeant first class in the Delta Force. But he wasn't a shooter. He was a SOCM, Special Operations Combat Medic. He was the team leader for extraction and stabilization." Miller felt the blood drain from his face. "Ethan Cole was the best field medic this country has ever produced," the general continued. "He didn't take lives, Sheriff. He saved them. He specialized in keeping people alive in impossible situations, under fire, underwater, in collapsing buildings. The file you are trying to read contains the details of 312 confirmed saves." "Why is a Delta operator driving a delivery truck in my town?" Miller asked, his voice barely audible. "Because he retired," the general said. 3 years ago. His wife. She was a police officer just like you. She was killed in an ambush. Ethan couldn't save her. He walked away from the military the next day. He wanted to raise his daughter in peace. He wanted to be a father, not a legend. The general paused, letting the weight of the information sink in. "He is a national hero, Sheriff. Treat him with the respect he earned." The line went dead. Miller slowly lowered the phone. The room was silent. The suspicious drifter narrative had shattered. Miller walked to the interrogation room door. He took a deep breath and pushed it open. Ethan looked up. He didn't ask what happened. He saw the change in the sheriff's eyes. He saw the shift from suspicion to awe. "You can go, Mr. Cole," Miller said quietly. I apologize for the delay." Ethan stood up. He didn't gloat. He didn't demand an apology. He just nodded. "Is the officer going to be okay?" Ethan asked. That was still his only concern. "The hospital says she's stable," Miller replied. "The doctor said the neck brace you made probably saved her from paralysis." Ethan picked up his jacket. "Good. That's good." He walked toward the door. A man who had commanded elite units in the most dangerous corners of the earth, now just wanting to go home and make breakfast for his little girl. Miller watched him leave. He realized that the miracle on the highway wasn't luck. It was the result of 20 years of elite training, hiding inside a faded delivery uniform. The storm had finally broken by the time Ethan pulled his truck into the driveway. The sky was a bruised purple, hinting at the coming dawn. His house was small, quiet, and dark, a stark contrast to the chaos of the highway and the cold sterility of the interrogation room. Ethan unlocked the front door as quietly as he could. The house smelled of lavender laundry detergent and old wood. It was the smell of the peace he had fought so hard to find. In the living room, the television was still on, playing a cartoon on mute. Curled up on the worn beige sofa, wrapped in a fluffy pink blanket, was Mia. She was 7 years old. She was fast asleep, her messy hair splayed across the cushion, clutching a stuffed bear that had lost one of its button eyes years ago. Ethan stood in the doorway watching her. The adrenaline that had fueled him through the rescue and the interrogation finally evaporated, leaving behind a heavy, aching exhaustion. He wasn't the Delta Force operator here. He wasn't the ghost. He was just a dad who was late coming home. He walked over and knelt beside the sofa. He brushed a strand of hair away from her face with a hand that was still stained with engine grease. "I'm home, Bug," he whispered. Mia stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, sleepy and confused. She saw him and smiled, a smile that broke his heart and healed it all at once. "You're late, Daddy," she mumbled, reaching out her arms. "I know," Ethan said, scooping her up effortlessly. "The rain was bad, I'm sorry." He carried her to her bedroom, tucked her in, and kissed her forehead. He waited until her breathing evened out, until she was safe in her dreams. Only then did he retreat to his own room. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed. He didn't turn on the light. He reached for the framed photograph on the nightstand. Even in the darkness, he knew every detail of the image. It was Sarah. She was wearing her dress blues, her police badge gleaming on her chest, her smile bright and fearless. She looked just like Lily Brooks. The memory hit him like a physical blow. 2 years ago, a rainy night just like this one. A radio call about a single-vehicle accident on a winding canyon road. The official report said she lost control on a slick turn, but Ethan knew better. When he had seen the wreckage of his wife's car, he saw the cut brake lines. He saw the unnatural way the vehicle had been forced off the road. It was a message from the local drug syndicates she was investigating. A staged accident. A quiet execution. Ethan gripped the photo frame until his knuckles turned white. General Harland had called him a hero. He had told the sheriff that Ethan had saved 312 lives. But to Ethan, that number was meaningless, because the number of lives he wanted to save was 1, and he had failed. He had spent a decade patching up soldiers in the worst hellholes on Earth. He could stop a femoral bleed in a sandstorm. He could keep a heart beating in the back of a shaking helicopter. But when his wife was bleeding out on a lonely road in America, he hadn't been there. He had arrived minutes too late, armed with all the skill in the world, but no time to use it. That was the night the soldier died, and the delivery driver was born. He had resigned the next morning. He handed in his rifle, his medical kit, and his clearances. He took the job at the logistics company because it was invisible. It was boring. It was safe. He wanted a life where the biggest stress was a traffic jam, not an ambush. He wanted a job that allowed him to drop Mia off at school at 8 a.m. and pick her up at 3 p.m. He wanted to protect her from the violence that had consumed the rest of his life. He thought he had buried the past. He thought he had walked away from the war. But tonight, on Highway 66, when he saw Lily Brooks trapped in that car looking so much like Sarah, the war had reached out and grabbed him by the throat. Ethan placed the photo back on the nightstand. He looked at his hands. They were shaking now, just slightly. He had saved Lily. He had cheated death tonight. But as he looked at the empty side of his bed, he knew that the hardest battle wasn't fighting the cartel or the storm. It was forgiving himself for the one life he couldn't save. 3 days later, the sun was shining over Oak Creek, a deceptive contrast to the darkness gathering beneath the town's surface. Ethan was in his driveway, tightening the chain on Mia's pink bicycle. It was a mundane, peaceful task, the kind of task he lived for. But the peace was shattered by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Ethan didn't look up immediately. He finished tightening the bolt, wiped his hands on a rag, and then slowly turned around. An unmarked sedan had pulled up. Sheriff Miller stepped out, looking older and more tired than he had the night of the storm. But he wasn't alone. From the passenger side, Officer Lily Brooks emerged. She was moving stiffly, favoring her left side. Her arm was in a sling, and there was a dark bruise fading on her jawline. But she was standing upright. Ethan stood up, crossing his arms. His posture was defensive. He didn't want this world on his doorstep. "Mr. Cole," Lily said. Her voice was raspy, likely from smoke inhalation. "I wanted to come in person, to say thank you." "You already thanked me," Ethan said, his voice low. "You're alive. That's enough." "It's not just about the thank you," Sheriff Miller interjected, stepping forward. He took off his hat, a gesture of humility that didn't come easily to him. "We have the forensic report on the cruiser." Ethan went still. He knew what was coming. He had suspected it the moment he pried that door open. "The brake lines weren't worn out," Miller said, his voice grim. "They were cut, clean precision cuts, and the steering column was tampered with." Ethan looked at Lily. He saw the flash of anger in her eyes, the same righteous anger he used to see in Sarah's. "It wasn't an accident," Lily said firmly. "The Viper cartel is sending a message. They aren't just running drugs through the county anymore. They are hunting us. They want the police to be afraid to patrol Highway 66.
"Why are you telling me this?"
Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because we know who they are," Miller said. "We located their distribution hub, an old textile warehouse on the edge of town. My deputies, they want to kick down the doors tonight. They want revenge for what happened to Lily." Miller paused, looking down at his boots. "But they are just kids, Ethan. They have badges and pistols, but they aren't soldiers. If they walk into that warehouse tonight, half of them aren't coming home." Ethan remained silent. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak tree in his yard. "I looked at your file, Ethan," Miller continued, his voice pleading. "I know what you did in Fallujah. I know what you did in the caves of Kandahar. You know how to dismantle a fortified position." "I'm retired," Ethan said coldly. "I don't carry a gun." "I don't need a shooter," Miller said quickly. "I have shooters. I need a general. I need a mind that understands angles, entry points, and contingencies. I need someone to look at the floor plans and tell us how to get in without starting a bloodbath." "No," Ethan turned back to the bicycle. "I have a daughter. I can't get involved in a cartel war." "They killed your wife, didn't they?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lily had spoken it. She had stepped closer, ignoring the pain in her ribs. Ethan froze. He turned back slowly, his eyes dangerous. "You read my file too?" "No," Lily said softly. "I saw the way you looked at me in the wreck. You weren't just saving a stranger. You were trying to fix a mistake from the past." She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. "I know you're afraid for your daughter, but if we don't stop them, how long until their war spills into the schools? How long until a stray bullet finds someone else you love?" Ethan looked at Lily. In her, he saw Sarah. He saw the same stubborn refusal to back down, the same naive belief that the badge could protect her from monsters. He looked back at the house. Through the front window, he could see Mia watching cartoons. Safe. Innocent. If the sheriff's deputies went in blind, they would die. The cartel would win, and the town would belong to the men who killed Sarah. Ethan sighed. It was a long, heavy exhale that seemed to carry the weight of 10 years of war. He tossed the greasy rag onto the tool bench. "I don't touch a weapon," Ethan said, his voice steel. "I don't pull a trigger. I don't wear a wire." "Agreed," Miller said, relief washing over his face. "Just tell us how to do it." "Bring the blueprints to the station," Ethan commanded, the shift in his tone instantaneous. He was no longer the mechanic. He was the team leader. "And get me the thermal imaging of the warehouse." He looked at Lily, his expression softening just a fraction. "I'm not doing this for the police," Ethan said. "And I'm not doing it for revenge." He looked back at the window where his daughter was sitting. "I'm doing it so that no other child in this town has to grow up as an orphan like my daughter." The briefing room at the Oak Creek station was thick with tension and the smell of stale pizza. 12 deputies stood around a large table covered in blueprints and satellite photos. They were young, eager, and angry. They were cleaning their weapons, checking their vests, ready for a fight. Sheriff Miller stood at the head of the table, tapping a ruler against a map of the textile warehouse. "All right, listen up," Miller said, his voice grim. "We hit them at 0200. Team Alpha breaches the front gate with the ram. Team Bravo hits the rear loading dock. We go in hard, we go in fast. We overwhelmed them with superior numbers. The deputies nodded. It was a standard raid. Kick the door, scream commands, trade fire if necessary. That's a suicide mission. The voice came from the back of the room. It was quiet, calm, and utterly absolute. Every head turned. Ethan Cole was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was wearing jeans and a gray hoodie, but he commanded more authority than anyone in the room. "Excuse me?" a young deputy challenged, bristling at the interruption. Ethan pushed off the wall and walked to the table. The crowd parted for him. He looked down at the sheriff's plan, arrows drawn in red marker pointing directly at the main entrances. "This building," Ethan said, pointing to the warehouse, "was built in the 50s. It has reinforced steel doors here and here. If you use a battering ram, it will take you 3 swings to breach. That's 10 seconds. Ethan looked up, meeting the sheriff's eyes. 10 seconds is an eternity. By the time you get that door open, they will have established a crossfire in the hallway. It's a fatal funnel. Your men will be silhouetted in the doorway. You lose 3 deputies before you even step inside." Miller swallowed hard. "We have shields." "Shields don't stop armor-piercing rounds," Ethan countered. "And they don't stop the IEDs rigged to the doorframe." He picked up a blue marker. He didn't ask for permission. "You're thinking like cops," Ethan said, his voice devoid of judgment, just stating facts. "You want to serve a warrant. These men are not criminals, they are insurgents. They have an escape route." Ethan drew a line from the warehouse to the nearby river. "The old storm drains run right under the foundation. You breach the front, they drop a smoke grenade, slip into the tunnels, and pop up 2 blocks away behind your perimeter. Or worse, they flank you." The room went silent. The young deputy who had challenged him looked down at the map, realizing he had almost walked into a grave. "So what do we do?" Miller asked quietly. "We can't just let them stay there." "We don't attack the building," Ethan said, capping the marker. "We attack their minds." He looked around the room. "We don't want a firefight. In a firefight, luck is a factor. I don't like luck. We want to surrender." Ethan pulled a fresh sheet of paper over the map. He began to sketch a new plan. It wasn't a formation of arrows, it was a web of control points. "Step 1. We cut the power," Ethan explained. "Total blackout, not just the lights but the ventilation. The silence will make them nervous." "Step 2. Signal isolation," he continued. "We deploy portable jammers. No cell phones, no radios. They can't call for backup. They can't talk to each other if they are in different rooms. Isolation breeds panic." "Step 3. The ghost." Ethan tapped the map. "We don't breach. We use directional speakers and flashbangs at the perimeter. We simulate the sounds of a heavy breach, helicopters, heavy boots, chatter. But we don't go in." He looked at the confused faces of the deputies. "We make them believe they are surrounded by a battalion of federal agents. We make them believe there is a sniper in every window. We elevate their stress levels until their adrenaline crashes." "Fear is a better weapon than a rifle," Ethan said softly. "When they are blind, deaf, and terrified, they won't fight. They will hide. And when they hide, they trap themselves." He looked at Miller. "We wait them out. We make them think death is coming through every door, until the only thing they want in the world is to see a pair of handcuffs." Miller looked at the plan. It was brilliant. It was bloodless. It was the strategy of a man who had seen enough violence to know that the best victory is the one where nobody shoots. "Change the loadouts," Miller ordered his team, his voice resolute. "Put the rifles away. Grab the wire cutters and the jammers. We're doing it his way." At 0200 hours, the industrial district was swallowed by darkness. The textile warehouse sat like a sleeping beast, unaware that a cage was being built around it. Parked 2 blocks away, inside an unmarked command van, the air was cool and filled with the hum of computer servers. Ethan Cole sat in the captain's chair. He was no longer the man who fixed bicycles or delivered packages. He was the ghost. He wore a headset, his eyes darting across a bank of 6 monitors showing live feeds from drones, thermal cameras, and body cams. "Kill the grid," Ethan ordered calmly. A mile away, a technician threw a switch. The streetlights died. The warehouse went pitch black. The hum of the ventilation fans inside the building stopped abruptly. Ethan watched the thermal screen. Inside the warehouse, the heat signatures of 20 armed men flared up in confusion. They were blind. They were death. The psychological squeeze had begun. "Sector 1 is panicking," Ethan said into the mic, his voice steady as a heartbeat. "They are moving toward the north exit. Team Alpha, block the alleyway. Do not engage. Just let them see you." On the screen, the cartel members kicked open the north door, hoping to run. But the moment the door swung open, they were met with a wall of blinding floodlights and the menacing silhouette of an armored vehicle. They slammed the door shut and retreated, terrified. "They are running back inside," Ethan noted. "They feel the trap closing. Now, deploy the audio." Directional speakers placed around the perimeter began to blast the recorded sounds of helicopter blades and heavy boots. To the men inside, it sounded like the entire U.S. Army was descending on the roof. "They are clustering in the central sorting bay," Ethan analyzed the heat blobs on the screen. "They are huddled together. Fear is making them predictable." But then, the chessboard changed. On the monitor, 3 heat signatures separated from the group. They moved toward the back office, the night shift break room. They dragged out 2 smaller signatures. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Civilians. Night cleaning crew. I didn't see them on the manifest." The radio crackled. It was Lily who had infiltrated the basement level to secure the fuse box. "Ethan," Lily whispered, "they have hostages. 2 of them. They are using them as shields. They're shouting that they'll start shooting if we don't back off." The mood in the command van shattered. Sheriff Miller looked at Ethan, panic rising in his chest. "We have to breach. If we wait, they execute the hostages." "If you breach, the hostages die in the crossfire," Ethan snapped. "Stand down." He zoomed in on the schematic of the building. He looked at the ceiling layout of the central bay. "Lily," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave. "What is your position?" "I'm at the maintenance riser beneath the main floor," she replied. "Look up," Ethan commanded. "There is a red pipe running along the ceiling. It's the industrial fire suppression system. It's not water. It's a high-pressure chemical powder designed to smother electrical fires." "I see the manual release valve," Lily said, "but it's 30 feet away near the stairs. If I move, they'll see me." "They won't see you," Ethan said, watching the thermal feeds, "because they are looking at the doors. Listen to me. On my mark, I want you to run. You have 3 seconds. Ethan keyed the mic to the perimeter teams. "All units prepare flashbangs at the skylights. Drop them on my count." It was a risky synchronization. If the timing was off by a second, Lily would be spotted. 3, Ethan counted. The cartel leader raised his gun to the hostage's head. 2. Lily tensed her muscles, ready to sprint. 1. Execute! Boom! 4 flashbangs detonated on the roof skylights. The explosion of light and sound was deafening. The cartel members flinched, looking up instinctively. In that split second of distraction, Lily bolted from the shadows. She reached the red valve and yanked it down with both hands. The room was instantly filled with a thick, white chemical fog. It wasn't smoke. It was a dense powder that coated everything, blinding the gunmen and sucking the oxygen out of the immediate area. "Visibility is 0, Ethan shouted. "Hostages are on the floor! Go, go, go!" The SWAT team smashed through the windows, but they didn't need to shoot. The cartel members were coughing, blinded and disoriented, dropping their weapons to cover their faces. Ethan watched the thermal screen. He saw the SWAT officers tackle the gunmen. He saw 2 officers shield the hostages and drag them to safety. One by one, the heat signatures of the bad guys were pinned to the ground. "Central Bay clear," a voice crackled over the radio. "Suspects in custody. Hostages are safe. 0 casualties." Ethan leaned back in his chair. He took off his headset. Sheriff Miller was staring at the monitor, his mouth slightly open. He had expected a war. He had gotten a surgery. "How did you know they would look up?" Miller asked. Ethan looked at the screen where the white fog was slowly settling over the defeated empire of the drug lords. "Because everyone looks up when the sky falls," Ethan said quietly. "Good work, Sheriff. Your town is safe." The dust had settled at the station. The holding cells were full, echoing with the angry shouts of the captured cartel members. But in the main interrogation room, it was quiet. Ethan stood on one side of the 2-way mirror, watching. Inside, handcuffed to the table, sat Vargas. The man who ran the Viper cartel. The man whose orders had led to the accident that killed Sarah 2 years ago. "You don't have to go in there," Sheriff Miller said, standing beside Ethan. "We have him. He's never seeing sunlight again. You did your job." "I need to close the door," Ethan said quietly. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Vargas looked up. He was a man accustomed to fear. He expected a cop screaming threats. When he saw the delivery driver in the gray hoodie, he laughed. A cold, mocking sound. "So," Vargas sneered, leaning back in his chair, "you are the mechanic, the one who turned off the lights." Ethan didn't speak. He walked around the table, moving with a predator's grace. He stopped right behind Vargas's chair. Vargas stiffened. He was baiting the trap. He wanted Ethan to snap. If this civilian beat him up in police custody, his lawyers would have a field day. They would claim mistrial. They would claim police brutality. "Your wife," Vargas whispered, his voice dripping with poison. "Officer Cole, right? She was pretty. It was a shame about the rain that night. Cars are so fragile." He turned his head, grinning up at Ethan. "Go ahead. Hit me. Be a man. Do what you came here to do." Ethan's hand clenched into a fist at his side. The rage was there, a white-hot fire that wanted to crush the bones of the man responsible for his nightmare. It would be so easy, one strike. But then, Ethan exhaled. His hand relaxed. He leaned down, bringing his face inches from Vargas's ear. "You want me to be a monster," Ethan whispered. "Because monsters understand each other, but I am not like you." Vargas's smile faltered. "My wife believed in the badge," Ethan continued, his voice steady and terrifyingly calm. "She believed in the law. She died protecting it. If I touch you, if I hurt you, I spit on her grave." Ethan stood up straight, looking down at the criminal with pity, not hate. "I am not going to kill you, Vargas. That is the easy way out. You are going to live. You are going to sit in a concrete box for 80 years. You are going to rot while the world forgets your name. You are going to watch every dollar you made disappear. You are going to watch your empire turn to dust from behind a cage." Ethan turned his back on him. "That is my revenge," Ethan said. "I am letting the law win." He walked out of the room. Behind him, Vargas screamed, a sound of pure frustration. He had failed to break the soldier. Ethan had won the war without throwing a single punch. The next morning, the sun rose over Oak Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and apricot. The storm was gone. The streets were drying. The town was waking up, safer than it had been in years, though most people would never know why. At the shipping distribution center, the routine was back to normal. Forklifts beeped. Conveyor belts hummed. Ethan Cole was there, wearing his brown delivery uniform. He lifted a heavy cardboard box, scanned the barcode, and placed it onto the back of his truck. He wasn't the tactical commander anymore. He wasn't the ghost. He was just employee number 412. As he closed the rear doors of his truck, a black cruiser pulled into the lot. The other drivers stopped working, watching curiously. Sheriff Miller and Lily Brooks stepped out. Lily was still wearing her sling, but she looked stronger. They walked up to Ethan. There were no reporters. There was no ceremony. There were no medals in velvet boxes. Ethan wouldn't have wanted them anyway. "We just wanted to see you," Lily said, her voice filled with emotion. "Before you started your route." "Just doing my job," Ethan smiled, wiping his hands on his pants. "You saved my life," Lily said, "and last night you saved the soul of this department." Ethan nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. He reached for the door handle of his truck. "I have to go," Ethan said gently. "I have a lot of packages to deliver, and I have to pick up Mia at 3. He climbed into the driver's seat. He looked down at them through the open window. Sheriff Miller didn't wave goodbye. He straightened his back. He snapped his heels together, and slowly, respectfully, he raised his hand in a crisp, military salute. Beside him, Lily did the same. It was the highest honor one warrior could give another, a silent acknowledgement of the sacrifice, the skill, and the quiet dignity of the man in the truck. Ethan paused. He gave them a single, sharp nod in return. He put the truck in gear and pulled away. The big brown vehicle merged into the morning traffic, disappearing among the sedans and school buses. We often look for heroes in the sky, wearing capes and masks. We look for them in the headlines and the history books. But true strength is not found in the power to destroy. It is found in the hands that heal. It is found in the heart that chooses to protect, even when it is broken. There are heroes walking among us every day. They don't need glory. They don't need an audience. They just need a reason to be kind. And sometimes, the man driving the delivery truck is the only thing standing between the darkness and the light.